Hi, Maria. Sorry about this. I don't know what happened. Just the electricity maybe tripped or something. So let's look at this bit in terms of what I was continuing to mention. That last but not the least, we'll be looking at, obviously covering in the learning outcome for to look at making some recommendations of how efficiencies in a particular organization can be, done or implement some measures which will bring about efficiency within an organization. So in order to discuss this learning outcome, we're going to be looking at a presentation and a short video which I've got today, and this would be, helping us understand specifically the areas related to performance, which is employee performance management, and the use of physical resources from a point of view of human resources management, and then looking at the effective use and the recommendations with an organization in mind that we would want to cover in this particular learning outcome. So if I just switch you over before to the presentation, let's look at a bit of indicative content which is there in terms of the learning outcome. So there are bits and pieces that we need to cover about in terms of physical resources. There is some second bullet point which basically covers how do we look at data and employee performance and what kind of data that we need to look at specifically for understanding employee performance, and then how do we make recommendations on improving the efficiency in particular for physical oblique human resources. So a fair bit of content to be looked at from a point of view of the learning outcome 4. And let's look at going to the presentation. So in the presentation, I've got a couple of slides that I want to, essentially go through. But what we would want to do is cover this up with the focus on human resources in particular, and then take it from there. Now, before I start the discussion, what I want to look at is also look at some of the key words which are given in the assessment grid, like the learning outcome 4 and the assessment criteria. I want to look at the, base definitions or understandings of, what does it mean when I talk about employee performance, and what does it mean when I talk about physical resources? Not that we are not aware of, but just generally, doing a bit of a refresh in terms of what is employee performance. Now, because this particular point comes across twice or a couple of times during the discussion of this particular learning outcome, it is important to understand, where and how important is employee performance, within the organization, any organization, business organization that we talk about. Now, employee performance generally refers to the level of productivity or, efficiency and effectiveness with which employees are able to complete their tasks, which are given in their job description or within the organization, within, say, for example, an annual agenda or targets or, agreed key performance indicators, which are agreed with the employees at the start of the year. Now, these will help the company measure how well an employee is actually fulfilling their job responsibilities, meeting the objectives, which will help the organization meet overall objectives for the year, and then what is their contribution towards the achievement of these overall objectives of the organization. Now, employee performance is also, generally evaluated on the basis of certain predetermined criteria within the organization. And this could be in terms of the job description that you carry and how well do you understand organizational goals. So, for example, if I take the initial example that I shared with you was for the NHS. Now, we know that in most places within the NHS, the accident and emergency A&E wait times are quite high. And what CQC defines these times as to be a maximum of 2 hours. But currently, if I look at the Northwest, the wait time in some of the hospitals in the A&E department are 4 to 5 hours, even 6 hours in Wales. Now, in order to reduce this down to the desired levels, all employees would be given some sort of incremental efficiency targets, and they would need to perform in a way wherein it helps reduce these wait times from a time when a patient is picked up by the ambulance and it's taken to the emergency department. And from there, the allocation of bed and the staff, ambulance staff then being released to be able to follow up on other calls is basically the wait time. from the time the patient arrives to the time the patient gets a bed and then gets seen by the doctor. Now, in this case, there are some predetermined criteria which would be, fine-tuned and tweaked, and this would involve maybe looking at the quality of work, timeliness, efficiency, looking at, how, the staff has the ability to be able to look at problems, communication skills, and in some cases, how much they are following in terms of the organizational policies and procedures which have been laid down in order to help achieve those objectives. So this would all constitute what is called, employee performance. When we look at what are physical resources, we are very clear what are physical resources. We know that physical resources, typically from an organizational perspective, could be things like, tangible goods, real estate, material, office space, things like that. And when we talk about key concepts on which we measure the employee performance, we are looking at absenteeism, sickness. So absenteeism tends to be when an employee is absent from the organization without a valid reason. Sickness would mean you are on sick leave, you're not well, and in some cases, some organizations require a sick note to be produced or a self-certified sick note to be produced if you are absent, or not working from not able to work for a period of more than 3 days. And then in some cases, this adds up to the cost which the organization is racking up as far as lost time is concerned. Now, there is a particular video that I want everyone to see, and I'm going to look at showcasing going through this short particular video. And this short video would help us understand what is performance and how is performance essentially measured. So if I look at this small video, let's listen into this.
Employees' work performance is evaluated and strengths and weaknesses are identified so that the employee knows where improvement is needed. Over the years, there have been some new types of reviews that are being met with success in today's business world. These require that evaluations be done not only for raises, promotions, or bonuses, but for an employee's growth and development. These include management by objectives review. This method, often called MBO, measures the employee's accomplishments against a clearly established set of objectives. If managers and employees begin the year by working together to list these objectives, the end-of-year appraisal can simply compare each goal with its final outcome. This method is simple, clear, and empowers employees in the goal-setting process, but it disregards non-goal related success metrics. Rating scale is probably the most common review type. Using this method, a supervisor rates an employee on a numerical scale for a defined set of behaviors, traits, competencies, or completed projects. This method gains points for simplicity and functionality, but it only works well if both managers and employees share the same understanding of each point on the scale. The 360-degree feedback review is a new kind of performance review. It incorporates peers, supervisors, and non-contract like customers and suppliers. This broad feedback can provide a multi-dimensional performance that can cancel the influence of bias. The goal is to paint an accurate picture of employees' strengths and weaknesses. Gathering feedback from multiple sources is a great way to ensure employees are rated fairly and accurately. No matter which type of performance evaluation used, remember the goal is to foster communication between managers and employees. To make your performance reviews as productive as possible, try the following steps. Be prepared. Lead with the positive. Don't be confrontational. Keep it simple. Be consistent. Make it a two-way conversation. Address what's important to the employee. Discuss work and life balance. Be a good listener. Give feedback regularly. To download the review template.
As you can see in this particular video, why I wanted to basically discuss this and show this across the start is because this will give us a bit of a background in terms of what we need to be able to discuss when we talk about improving employee performance and how employers actually measure employees' performance within the organization. Now, there are various methods which are there, and obviously this particular learning outcome involves a bit of self-study because I'll be providing templates because one of the things that you must have seen, and I would like to quickly share the screen again on the indicative spec and the unit spec of this particular unit. What you will see is that there are learning outcomes which basically have what are called key descriptors. So in most cases, as you can see, it says understand, and here also it says understand. That means these are theoretical learning outcomes in which you need to basically go through the key parts of theoretical frameworks, theories, and examples, and then basically understand and build your understanding and knowledge about some of these key facts which are required in the unit. But the fourth learning outcome is actually focused on be able to. That means here you are essentially going to be required to conduct or suggest or basically do it, and that is where be able to would essentially come in. That means you are going to be required to talk about performance management techniques. You're going to be required to show how it is done within the organization by taking up an example, and those are the bits which are important when we look at this particular learning outcome. So here, some part of it is to be able to practically do it. And that is why the video that I've shared primarily gives you some idea in terms of how you're going to be using some of the key techniques that we are going to list and discuss. And there are some handouts which I put up on Moodle, which will allow you to go into a bit more detail about understanding some of these performance metrics, and then use them with an example to be able to, do the tasks in the assignment, specifically tasks related to learning outcome 4 when you come across in the assignment brief. Now, the first, essential requirement that we do get to see in the assessment criteria after this brief discussion is to look at understanding, the bits in terms of how are we going to look at data which is required to look at managing employee performance, or looking at taking a fair estimate in terms of how the employee performance can be monitored and measured within the organization. So here, if we look at starting with a couple of things, what we need to know is what are the tools and techniques which are essentially used firsthand to measure employee performance. So these are some of the techniques which are used. One, and I've listed them down as bullet points and then created individual slides to be able to explain them a bit more. One of the techniques that we look at is key performance indicators. That means the KPIs which are set at the start of the year, which the business is looking at achieving, and then they are further broken down into employee KPIs. And these smaller KPIs which the employees achieve will eventually end up helping the organization achieve those KPIs. Then you have performance appraisals, which most of us are aware of because we've worked in the organization at some stage or the other, or a company at some stage or the other. And every year, every organization has some sort of a performance appraisal to appraise how you have done and come across in terms of your goals and targets which have been given for working during the course of the year. We have 360-degree appraisal. This technique is normally used when customers' feedback is also required. And when we talk about 360-degree feedback, we are here looking at the option of, in some cases, discussing why employees sometimes need to look at, for example, I'll put it this way, sometimes they have to look at, example, getting the voice of the customer in terms of the feedback. And that tends to be the case because the organization is customer facing. And when we look at the organization being customer facing, some of the key product services and repeat purchase in terms of business tends to happen, by existing customers. And in those cases, you would generally see that there would be some feedback which would be taken in terms of how the employees performing when we look at taking feedback from not just the immediate manager, but also looking at peers, looking at customers, and then at some stage looking at even other people that you deal and work with within the setup when you're working or within the organization. Management by objective is primarily a process wherein specific objectives are defined, and these objectives are then defined to help identify particular goals which need to be completed by employees. And then there are rewards and incentives which are put against individual performance, because MBO, when we look at in terms of as a measurement tool or a performance tool, is generally individually driven. So here the objectives are set for each individual, and these objectives are set for each individual allow the individual to achieve, and in this case, your destiny, if I may put it this way, is in your own hands. So if you achieve, there are slabs or there are sometimes incremental targets which are defined. And if you achieve more, you earn more, you get more bonus, you get more payouts from the organization. So these are basically qualitative objectives which are normally set for individuals by the organization. Then we have what are called reward and incentive programs. And these reward and incentive programs that we look at are programs which are designed to reward good performance. That means if you're following the policies, principles, and helping to contribute towards the achievement of objectives of the organization, then there are rewards and incentives which the HR department puts in place. And these would then primarily be in terms of reputation, increase in job responsibility. It could be incentives which are given out as holiday trips. It could be employee stock option plans. In most organizations, if you're doing well within a particular role for a number of years, you have a great change, or you go from one particular title or position to a promotion and a new position, which is normally given through what is called a promotion. And that is where you have increase in salary, increase in your job and responsibility, maybe supervisory responsibility, more decision-making power, and obviously more, the ability to contribute more towards the organizational achievement. And they tend to be what are called the reward and achievement programs. Now, reward and recognition programs also are looking at the morale of the employees. They're also looking at developing loyalty of the employee within the organization. And in some cases, these recognition programs also look at giving awards. So employee of the year award that we normally see, or employee of the month that we generally see. And some of them might also carry what are called, along with these rewards, reputation and recognition rewards, they might also carry what are called, financial incentives or financial rewards. And that could be, in small organization, it tends to be an Amazon voucher or some sort of a day off, or, in large organization, it tends to be holiday trips and things like that. And they are all generally used as tools by the HR department to be able to, keep the employees motivated and obviously keep them moving towards performing better within the organization. Now, there is also, when we look at performance appraisals, there is in most organizations something called a personal development plan or a career development plan. Now, most employees would have this sort of a planner at their end. This is something which is a document that you maintain for your own personal development. You look at writing down your goals, your strengths and weaknesses, and what are you achieving to work towards. And this generally tends to be a document which is reviewed by your manager. And when we look at this document being reviewed by our manager, what we are generally saying is that in the case of, personal development plan, this tends to be something wherein what will happen is that at any given stage, the employee would be looking at putting down specific targets for training. Will have specific goals, which could be weakness areas, which the organization is going to help improve. And for that, what they're going to do is help put what is called an employee development plan in place. And this personal development plan or an employee development plan would be generally looking at helping you pick up, skills, or sharpen your weakness areas, which will allow you to work much better and obviously pick up the skills required to be able to do your job more effectively. And here, this plan is an encouragement from the organization to say that you're on a path or you're on a track for growth and growth within the company, and the company would invest in the form of training and development to ensure that you are picking up new skills, and these new skills would then allow you to work more effectively or take up more responsibilities within the organization. Now, what I've done in order to explain these performance measurements technique, I've taken up an example of Primark here. You could take up an example of any organization, but just an organization that would help, wherein you are able to grab or get data from the website or the annual general report of the company. And here the idea is to look at how a company would look at putting systems into place which is the ones that we've discussed: KPIs, performance appraisal, 360-degree feedback, MBO, management by objectives, any of such systems in place which the HR would put in place to try and measure the performance of the employee, and to see if the organization, if the employees within the organization are able to then perform and help achieve the objectives of annual objectives of the organization. So one such thing Primark would have as an example is that they want to expand to 250 outlets in the year 2023. So in this case, the HR would do some planning, and that planning would be revolving around looking at either renting or leasing out retail spaces, looking at employee recruitment on a massive scale to, have these outlets up and running and have adequate manpower within these outlets. And what they would then look at is drawing up descriptions or job descriptions in terms of and understanding where they can get these employees from who are going to be, working within those outlets. So as an example, I've taken, targets which would be set by the management. They would be further broken down into regional targets, and then different departments would come into, play to be able to help achieve those targets. And in some cases, there would be targets which could be, administration-led, wherein the administration would need to find lease places and locate best possible locations where the outlets could come up. Then the IT department would have certain role. The marketing would have certain role, the HR would have certain role, the operations side of things would have certain role. And that is how you would see the organization helping, HR putting this plan in place and then helping essentially achieve the organization its ultimate goal of increasing the number of outlets in the year. Any questions on this so far? Okay, the second one looks at how do we look at, reviewing the data, and how do we look at best utilization of physical resources. Now, here again, I have, looked at, say, for example, taking up a company or an organization, because as I mentioned earlier, this particular learning outcome focuses on be able to. So here, most of the discussion that you're going to do in the assessments or in the assessment criteria is going to be using an example to explain the, using an example essentially of an organization to explain the context and then help accomplish the assessment criteria. So here, I have taken an example of Marks and Spencer, wherein Marks and Spencer's, collection of data in terms of how employees are utilizing physical resources, and are these physical resources enough to be able to help them achieve the objectives at the end of the year are being looked at. So in this case, Marks and Spencer in this case basically looks at an appraisal-based system which is ranking-based. So what they do is they look at ranking in terms of poor, average, above average, good, and outstanding. And there the ranking which is used, also helps the HR department in terms of shaping up what is called the retention policy. So in certain critical roles, they look at skills and capabilities. In operational roles, they will look at day-to-day routine tasks. And in administration oblique basic roles, they would look at, the ability to be able to take and delegate and, the delegated tasks to be completed. So examples of training and development, which is done in some levels at the initial basic level, employees would be trained and developed by providing regular training so that their skills are at the sharpest. They are obviously able to perform basis what is expected. At the mid-management level, wherein you're looking at employees with critical roles, they'll be looking at motivating them apart from training and development by looking at remuneration and incentives. And in the roles which are predominantly critical for the organization, wherein skills, capabilities, and decision-making responsibilities centered, they will be looking at also adding recognition or rewards and incentives in the form of recognition, promotion, awards, for the employees to keep them motivated and obviously performing towards the organizational aims and objectives. So some part of it, you would be seeing that here the measurement of performance of the employees is done regularly, some on the case monthly basis, some on quarterly basis. If you're working within sales, business development, account management, you would generally see customer services. This measurement tends to be on a monthly basis to keep correcting anything which is required to be done, and course correction measures which are required to be implemented to ensure that, they do not impact the overall, let's say, picture of the or overall result of the organization at the end of the year. So here the course correction tends to be, or performance measurement tends to be, on a monthly basis. In some cases, it is quarterly. Quality targets, if I look at improvement in terms of, say, A&E wait times, this is not going to be a short-term goal. So this is going to be a long-term goal of 12 months to 15 months to 18 months, because you would need to implement changes, then allow time for these changes to be embedded. And once these changes have been embedded, then you will start measuring the performance. So in some cases, they could be done on a monthly, monthly basis, in some cases quarterly and 6 monthly basis, in some cases yearly or annual or bi-monthly or biannual basis, and that would allow the organization to measure the performance of employees and how the organization is supporting the achievement of those targets which have been given to the employees. The last assessment criteria in this case tends to be, how do we look at managing the performance and improving the efficiency of the organization. So here is what I would suggest, that we need to take up an example and obviously make recommendations primarily for a particular organization. So if I say this one is going to be looking at making recommendations, so here what we are going to do is primarily look at the aspect of how we can make recommendations by taking up an example organization. So in this case, an example that I would say before we even look at making the recommendations would be essentially, checking with what organization you are comfortable with, for a point of view of looking at, that you have knowledge about and information about. So in some cases, when we look at, the aspect of, making recommendations can only be made if we, essentially look at, by taking up an example of an organization and also the data that we have. So here in this case, how do we look at making recommendations, to improve efficiency within an organization? Now, one of the things that I would suggest to do is to tackle this particular task is looking at generic options of how efficiency, or basically boosting of efficiency, can be done. When I say boosting, what I mean is improving performance or improving efficiency, which can be done primarily, within organizations. So there are certain general techniques that you would look at, which would be required to essentially talk about improving efficiency. So when we talk about improving efficiency, in those cases, you're looking at things like generic objectives, like, streamlining workflows, looking at rewriting processes, or, updating policies and procedures. In some cases, use of technology comes in, which talks about maybe automating things. In some organizations, when I look at customer services in general, this could be improving communication, speed at which communication can be done. One of the other points that you would look at would be, say, for example, training and development. So let's write some of these down in terms of, generic points, and then we can relate it to a particular organization. So I mentioned, for example, use of technology. Technology. I also mentioned, say, for example, updating policies and procedures or processes. And then we can also talk about, training and development. We can also look at, for example, in some cases, use of data and analytics. So real-time, measurement of analytics, which is real-time measurement of, performance of employees by collecting data. So, for example, if I look at Tesco's or if I look at Sainsbury's, they have Nectar card and they have a Tesco Club card. So what they're trying to do is collect real-time data from their customers in terms of how they are shopping. And what they're then looking at doing is basically using technology to send offers, coupons to you, which would say that, okay, you buy these products, so you buy more by increasing the size of your basket or the size of the spend that you do, in terms of, for example, the products that you buy. Now, the other bit could be regular reviews of employee performance. And that could be also a tool which could be used primarily to, look at improving efficiency. Now, the other bits that you can look at, so these are basically, generic parameters. One of the things that I would start off, and I would say it now, is basically setting smart goals, right? If you set goals which cannot be achieved or they are a bit of a stretch, then in those cases, what you will generally see is that the staff might not be interested in, picking up those goals because they feel that these are things which are not achievable. So in some cases, the management has to be quite particular, and they have to use the setting of goals in a very intelligent way, in a way which is acceptable to the organization. It is seen as that it can be achieved, and that would also mean that in some cases, employees are then more motivated to be able to take up those goals for the purposes of achievement. And last but not the least, what we generally get to see sometimes is that communication skills and process sometimes, need to be fine-tuned within the organization, and they tend to help in faster dissemination of information. And if this information is provided to employees on time, it helps in better decision-making, processes. And last but not the least, in some cases, sometimes organizations also, kind of promote teamwork and collaboration. Now, this is something which is clearly seen within the NHS, collaboration. Now, this is generally seen within NHS as a good example as an organization, is because if you look at multidisciplinary teams, MDTs, as we talk about in NHS, generally this is a cornerstone of how some of the practices and care is provided within the NHS. So when we look at multidisciplinary teams and when we look at NHS in particular, what we just generally get to see is that there is a high amount of importance which is given to people working within teams, and this helps bring professionals from different disciplines together to be able to collaborate and then provide holistic care or integrated care to the patients. So a good example that you could take in terms of primary care with the NHS would be to ensure that, when primary care is being given after a surgery, or, for example, if it is helping the patient to recover, you would see the entire team working together, nurses, healthcare workers, staff, social workers, community workers coming in to check the patient when the patient is discharged from the hospital at their home, doctors, consultant, the local surgery. And that is sometimes important in order to improve efficiency, and that efficiency in this case is the recovery time the patient takes in order to recover from a particular illness or an accident and after the surgery is important in terms of helping the team taking care of the patient. And that would mean each individual within the team, whether it's a nurse, healthcare assistant, social worker, consultant, or a doctor, they are playing their parts, physiotherapists playing their parts to be able to help the customer recover and get back on their feet. And those would be the examples that I would suggest that you need to take, but maybe have an organization in mind and take those examples to be able to discuss how efficiency, what recommendations you think you would be making to help improve the efficiency within the organization. So is that okay? Any questions on today's session so far?
No, thank you. That's all.
Any questions at your end, Maria?
No, thank you.
All right, okay. So there are some bits of documents that are provided on Moodle. And these documents are small handouts, which will be useful for you to look at, looking into, and they would help you understand some of the bits in terms of the performance management techniques in particular that we have discussed today. So things like the management by objectives, the KPIs, there is another technique called the balanced scorecard that can be looked at. And these are the bits that I would suggest that you do an additional bit of reading on, and they would be related to this particular learning outcome from a point of view of, getting a bit more understanding on how, performance and performance management is essentially looked at within the organization. Next week, we are going to catch up on discussing, the assignment brief for this particular unit. And what we are going to do is discuss how to put together the evidence required, for the purposes of, doing the assignment for this particular unit that we've discussed. So just very briefly showing you the Moodle screen where you will be able to find these handouts. So one is an appraisals fact sheet, which is from CIPD. It gives you all the different types of reviews which can be used by organization to improve employee performance, and how the performance of the employees can be actually improved by looking at various different performance appraisal techniques. This is first handout. The second handout is a balanced scorecard, which is a technique which is normally used to measure and relate the KPIs, the key performance indicators of an employee, with the key performance indicators of an organization. So it takes into account 4 different aspects: financial data, personal data, customers data, and then obviously how growth can be achieved within the organization. So looks at the organizational aims and objectives, looks at the employee skills and capabilities, customers' feedback, and financial data. So this is a good handout and a good handout to read to be able to understand what is a balanced scorecard. And then I've taken an example of a organizational's, Marks and Spencer in particular Plan A report, which is primarily a plan which the company has put into place to be able to improve overall productivity and performance of all its employees within all the departments across the organization. And this is a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan with a report which I've downloaded from the company's website, but it gives you a very good idea in terms of how sometimes these plans, which are looking at improving employee performance, productivity, efficiency, and then what the organizations at a large level, which means global or multi-level, multinational organizations which have operations in different countries with thousands and thousands of employees, need to put in place, and how this plan works across the board. And it is not a short-term plan or a short-term measure, but this is a plan to help improve and make sure that benefits of all, improvement and efficiency are then seen by all the departments within the organization. So this is a very good read for you to understand. There is a similar plan available with the NHS, and NHS has a NHS 2025, improvement plan. And this could be something, which you could look at reading, which will give you a good bit of understanding in terms of how NHS drives, improvements across its hospitals. And that plan is, quite a detailed plan, and it talks about plan which is related to, how they are looking at primarily making changes towards primary care, towards secondary care, and then some of the other departments within the organization. And it would be a good read for you to understand how this planning is put into place, by the government approved. And then it takes several years, for this plan to be achieved. So after COVID-19, there was a plan that was proposed at that point in time by the, Health Secretary Sajid Javed. And obviously, this is a good reading that I would suggest that you need to do in order to contextualize and maybe pick up an organization that you feel that you would be comfortable with for learning outcome 4, because some part of it will require examples, and those examples would come in from one organization that you pick and choose, and that would help you put that organization as an example when you're covering some of the tasks in the assignment. Is that okay? Good stuff. So if there are no more questions, I'm going to end today's session. And then obviously I will catch up with you next week on Saturday to be able to do the assignment discussions. I will also make available a sampler assignment that you can look at for the purposes of reference in terms of how you need to go about collating the evidence to complete and achieve this particular unit. So until then, thank you for joining, and I will see you next week.